Everyone thought she had it all. She walked with Naomi, Claudia, and Linda. She was one of the first Victoria's Secret angels. She was on the cover of Vogue more times than anyone could count. She smiled, and she did everything right. But looking back now, it's clear something was already wrong.
The shoots are really easy, actually. You kind of just hang out, every once in a while do a picture, chat with the other girls. Always very nice when there's other girls because you get to work less, chat more.
She sounded fine. But just 2 years later, she would be on national television trying to explain what really happened, and the world wouldn't believe her. Karen Mulder didn't disappear because her career faded. She disappeared because she said something no one wanted to hear. This isn't about scandal. It's about what happens when a woman in the spotlight breaks down in public, and no one wants to deal with it. Here's what really happened to Karen Mulder, and why we stopped talking about her. When I started looking into Karen Mulder's life, I expected to find a polished, high-fashion narrative. What I didn't expect was how normal her story began. There was no childhood obsession with fashion, no dream of fame. She wasn't even the one who got herself into modeling. Her friends submitted her photo to the Look of the Year contest in the Netherlands. She hadn't asked them to, and she didn't think much of it.
The way I started modeling was through the Look of the Year. And it kind of happened by accident because friends sent in pictures to the Look of the Year in Holland, and I never actually thought of being a model.
But she won, and that changed everything. She signed with Elite Model Management, one of the biggest agencies in the world at the time, and moved to Paris not long after. She was still a teenager, barely out of school. Suddenly, she was being photographed for Elle, Marie Claire, Vogue, walking in shows for Valentino and Mugler, all before she had even turned 20. There's not a lot of public footage from those very first years, but if you know what Elite was like in the early 90s, you know she wasn't eased in gently. Around that time, at just 18, Karen briefly married a young French photographer named René Bosny, another early decision made fast, in the middle of her whirlwind life. Models that young were being flown across Europe for bookings, sometimes with barely a day's notice, often alone. You were expected to adapt immediately, to be graceful, thin, polite, photogenic, grateful, no matter what was happening off camera. And Karen, by all accounts, did exactly that, quietly, professionally, without drama. Karen had this soft but striking look, the kind of face that didn't need exaggeration. Blonde, icy, with high cheekbones, and this stillness in her expression. Photographers noticed it. Designers booked her again and again. She had what people in the industry call the spark. Not just beauty, but something you could project a fantasy onto. But behind the photos and campaign shoots, the pace was nonstop. At 18, she was navigating fittings, castings, hotel rooms, international flights, and a new language, all while pretending it was effortless. Most people assume models live glamorously from the beginning, but the truth is, especially then, they were just expected to perform. By 1991, she was a regular in Vogue Paris and Harper's Bazaar. Her first campaigns with Guess made her instantly recognizable. And the timing couldn't have been more perfect. Fashion was shifting. The anonymous model was out. The supermodel was in.
You can be on 10,000 covers, but if they don't know your name, it doesn't... it's... what they call is like the top models. They're like the girls that, like Christy, Naomi, Claudia. People know their name and they follow their love stories. There's this whole thing in the media going on around them.
Karen became part of that first wave of true model celebrities, the ones people could name. Naomi, Linda, Claudia, and Karen. They weren't just walking runways. They were building an entirely new type of fame. But while her name was climbing the ranks, Karen herself stayed quiet. You can feel it when you watch her early interviews. She never acted like someone who was chasing the spotlight. By the mid-90s, Karen Mulder was everywhere. She was walking for Valentino, Galliano, Yves Saint Laurent. She became one of the earliest faces of Victoria's Secret, and her covers, Vogue, Elle, Harper's, were now international. She was no longer just a successful model. She was part of a cultural moment. This was the height of the supermodel era. The fantasy was everything, and Karen was perfect for it. Not loud, not aggressive. She had that quiet, frozen glamour the industry worshipped. But when you look at what she was saying in interviews during that time, there's a very different energy.
I never thought I was pretty, really. I mean, it's only been a few years that people started saying to me that I was pretty. I mean, I never felt like I was a very pretty girl.
It's subtle, but it's telling. She wasn't playing the role of the confident, untouchable beauty. Even at the height of her career, there was a kind of vulnerability under the surface, like she was never quite convinced she belonged there. And the contrast between her words and how the press described her couldn't have been sharper. Magazines called her the Ice Queen, the Porcelain Goddess, untouchable. She was often described as the most elegant of the supermodels, cold, poised, distant. But the reality was, Karen didn't even see herself as beautiful. And she wasn't trying to cultivate that image. The industry did it for her. She didn't talk much about her success. But people close to her noticed how she handled it.
She's never gotten a big head. That's something that I'm really proud of. Because it's so easy, especially when you're young. I think when she started to get really successful, it's probably about 20. When you're a 20-year-old and everybody goes like, oh my God, you're so beautiful, you're so funny, you're so this, so that. Then to keep your feet on the ground and just to stay sweet for people, sweet for other people, help other people, I think that really means a good character.
That alone made her different. Most supermodels in the 90s were expected to play a role, do interviews, be photographed with celebrities, show up at every Fashion Week party. It wasn't just about modeling. It was about building a personality the press could use. Karen didn't do any of that. She wasn't trying to turn herself into a headline. She did the work and left. And when you don't give the industry what it wants, it starts to turn away. The only person Karen ever mentioned staying close to in the fashion world was Carla Bruni. And that friendship made sense. Carla wasn't chasing fame either. She gave very few interviews, kept her life private, and eventually left fashion completely. Karen and Carla weren't known for being part of the party scene or starting drama backstage. They weren't loud, and they didn't try to be. It's likely that connection came from shared values. Two women doing the job, and keeping the rest of their lives separate. And behind the scenes, she was already starting to step back. She tried recording music. She took acting lessons. She traveled alone. There was a quiet search happening, something outside the noise of fashion. If you just looked at the campaigns, you wouldn't notice. But when you listen to her interviews, it's clear she was trying to figure out who she was outside the industry. Not as a career shift, just as a person. When I look at these years, I don't see a woman enjoying the spotlight. I see someone surviving it. She had the world's attention and barely used it. She gave the bare minimum to press. She didn't chase campaigns. She did the job, did it perfectly, and then disappeared into the background again. And yet, when she was on stage, something changed.
When I'm on the stage, I feel like I'm somebody else. I'm not me. I like to pretend I'm somebody else.
That line stuck with me. She didn't feel like herself on the runway. And maybe that was the point. She wasn't pretending to be a top model. She was pretending to be someone who was okay. By the late 90s, Karen was still working, but the energy was shifting. She was traveling less. She was appearing less. No one really knew what was going on, but we were about to find out. By the early 2000s, Karen Mulder had almost completely stepped out of the public eye. She wasn't on runways, she wasn't in campaigns, and she wasn't doing press. For a while, it just seemed like she had retired quietly, like she had chosen a different life after modeling. And then, seemingly out of nowhere, she reappeared. Not for a comeback shoot or a magazine cover. She came back on national French television, and she wasn't there to smile. In October 2001, Karen appeared on a talk show called Tout le monde en parle. It was a mainstream program with a huge audience. But instead of giving a polite, surface-level interview, she tried to explain what had really happened to her behind the scenes. She said she had been abused by people in the fashion world. That powerful men had taken advantage of her, manipulated her, and silenced her when she tried to speak up. During the taping, Karen reportedly named names, including her former modeling agency and a high-profile public figure. But the interview never aired. The interview was so shocking that the producers decided not to air it. So publicly, no names were ever spoken. But the implication was clear. These weren't isolated incidents. She was pointing to a pattern, one that had followed her throughout her career. One name that later came under fire was Gerald Marie, a senior executive at Elite Model Management and Karen's representative during her early career. Though Karen never publicly associated herself with the allegations later made against him by other models, the fact that she had worked closely within that system and tried to speak up about abuse is hard to ignore in hindsight. Days after the interview, she repeated her allegations in a formal statement to French police, which led to an official investigation into her claims. She knew how she sounded. She wasn't trying to paint herself as a victim without flaws. She openly admitted she had struggled with paranoia and with trusting people, but she also insisted that some of what happened to her was real, and that no one had ever cared enough to find out which parts were true. She described how, when she finally tried to get help, she was met with indifference. Doctors didn't believe her. Therapists dismissed her. And even though some people watching at the time may have found her words unsettling, it's hard not to agree with her now. Because what she needed, what she was asking for in that interview, wasn't attention or pity. It was understanding. It was someone finally saying, "I believe you." The full interview was never aired, and no official recording has ever surfaced. But based on first-hand accounts and the fragments that were reported, it's clear Karen wasn't spiraling. She wasn't unstable. She was exhausted, careful, trying to speak clearly about something that had haunted her for years. She talked about the trauma, about how she had been working nonstop, appearing perfect, smiling on cue, while inside she was falling apart. And when she finally stopped long enough to look back at everything, she realized how much of it she had buried just to survive. She said the version of herself the world had fallen in love with wasn't really her, that she had spent years being shaped by other people, by agents, by photographers, by brands, and she was just starting to understand what that had done to her. It wasn't just emotional damage. It was identity damage. She had built a public self that functioned like armor, and now it was cracking. And, of course, not all of these claims were ever fully proven or resolved in court. Some of it remains based on Karen's own statements, and we can't say with certainty what happened behind closed doors. But what's undeniable is that she tried to speak up, and that no one in power wanted to listen, because instead of empathy, the public gave her headlines. Instead of support, she got laughter. The media turned it into a spectacle. There were headlines like, "Karen Mulder cracks," and "Supermodel loses it." And just like that, the story wasn't about what she said. It was about how unstable she looked saying it. Her vulnerability wasn't a flaw, but the world treated it like one. She was dismissed not because she broke down, but because she did it in public. And in fashion, where image is everything, that made her dangerous. Not long after that interview, Karen was hospitalized in a psychiatric clinic in Paris. In December 2002, she was found unconscious in her Paris apartment after an apparent overdose of sleeping pills, leading to a coma. Her parents later stated she had checked herself into a clinic on the advice of a psychiatrist due to hallucinations. In June 2009, Karen was arrested in Paris after allegedly making threatening phone calls to a plastic surgeon, demanding the reversal of a previous operation. She spoke about something ugly, and people looked away. She had once been one of the most photographed women in the world, and now no one wanted her in the frame. These events are not just footnotes. They are critical chapters in understanding Karen Mulder's story and the industry's response, or lack thereof, to her cries for help. After 2009, Karen disappeared from the spotlight. No more interviews, no runway appearances, no new campaigns. And the strangest part is how fast everyone stopped talking about her. Not just the press, the entire industry. There were no editorials reflecting on her absence, no quiet tributes, not even a passing quote from someone she used to work with. For someone who had been everywhere, Dior, Valentino, Victoria's Secret, Vogue, Elle, runway after runway, the silence was loud. I went back through old issues, retrospectives, brand archives, the kinds of fashion books that love to repackage the 90s. And she's barely in them. You'll see Linda, you'll see Naomi, you'll see Claudia on every second page. Karen? Maybe one photo. Maybe a name in the caption. But nothing about what happened. Nothing about where she went. There were rumors, of course. Whispers of a possible music career. A mention of acting classes. And in 2007, she briefly reappeared on the runway for John Galliano's Dior Fall Couture show in Paris, one of several supermodels invited to mark the brand's 60th anniversary. It wasn't a full comeback. She didn't do interviews. She didn't linger. She simply walked and left. That same year, a quiet French television documentary showed her living a slow, private life, mostly practicing yoga, staying out of the spotlight. There was no story being sold. No statement. It felt like someone who had decided not to explain herself anymore. And still, no one in fashion said a word. Karen wasn't a side character in that era. She helped define it. She was part of that first name-only generation, working with nearly every major house. And when she broke down, when she told the truth publicly, they all moved on without her. I kept looking for something. A designer reflecting on her in an interview. A fashion house including her in a legacy campaign. Even just one Vogue feature. Where is she now? The kind they do when they want to bring someone back into the fold. But nothing. She was left out of the narrative, not because she didn't matter, but because she made people uncomfortable. Because once she stopped playing along, once she stopped being silent, they didn't know what to do with her. It's not that Karen Mulder was forgotten. It's that she was deliberately left out of the narrative. In the years since, many models have spoken out about mistreatment, mental health, power imbalances. Some have published books. Others have re-entered the spotlight on their own terms. But Karen didn't. She didn't try to repackage her story. She didn't turn her pain into a brand. She didn't reappear on Instagram or release a memoir. She simply removed herself. And in an industry where everyone eventually returns, through nostalgia, campaigns, magazine specials, or social media redemption, Karen never did. Even those closest to her, like Carla Bruni, have rarely spoken publicly. And that silence may be the clearest sign of all. She didn't ask to be a symbol. She didn't seek validation. And she certainly didn't want to explain what the industry had failed to hear the first time. Karen Mulder wasn't just erased because of what she said. She was erased because she said it too soon and too honestly. In the years since, there's been no memoir, no brand comeback. She's been seen only a handful of times, quietly practicing yoga, walking through the streets of the south of France, raising a daughter away from the cameras. There's never been an official confirmation of where she lives or what she's doing now. And maybe that's the way she wants it. We can't pretend to know every detail of what really happened. Some parts of Karen's story are still unclear, and maybe they always will be. But looking at what's public, what she tried to say, and how the world responded, it's hard not to feel like the industry failed her when she needed it most. Working on this story, I kept coming back to the same feeling. For someone who gave so much, what she got in return was silence. And that silence still says everything. Karen's story didn't end with reinvention. It ended with disappearance, not by choice, but by collapse. And that's why it still matters. Because even if we'll never know every detail, what we do know is that she didn't deserve what happened to her. It was a tragic story, and it still is. And as these things continue to happen to other women in the spotlight, it matters that we keep telling hers.